All Things COVID.
This is All Things COVID. My name is Sheetal. Welcome to this podcast that is an attempt to arm you with information that will help you in this very challenging journey brought on by the pandemic. Among the many concerns that, we are dealing with today is our own mental well-being. And the World Health Organization has also pointed out that the stress and anxiety that have been brought on by the pandemic will have to be dealt with long after the pandemic is over itself. And what are the common causes of this? From my very lay view, I can see that perhaps, the impact on livelihood. Am I going to lose my job? That's a question that's worrying some people. Or what's going to happen to me if I contract COVID? Okay, am I going to recover? What are the interventions? Are there going to be infrastructure issues that I will face? What's my family going to do? That sort of thing. Or even extended periods of isolation plunging me into a sense of not feeling that great about my life. Uncertainty about the future. I can think of so many things, but luckily for us, I will stop thinking over here and I'll start asking, because we are in the safe hands of Dr. Shiva Prakash Srinivasan, who's consultant, child, adolescent and adult psychiatry. He is part of Schizophrenia Research Foundation India, or SCARF as we know it. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva Prakash, for joining us on All Things COVID. Welcome, and how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Ms. Sheetal, for having me here.
COVID is actually a physical ailment, as we all know, brought on by the novel coronavirus. What's the connection between mental health and COVID? If you can help us connect the dots.
So, thank you for bringing this up. And as you very rightly mentioned, we more than a year and a half into this pandemic, and we've spent a lot of time and resources knowing all the aspects by which this particular illness affects us. Mm-hmm. So one of the key things that we need to recognize is that mental health in and of itself is a biopsychosocial. Mental illnesses are basically biopsychosocial in nature. Mm-hmm. So there are components of biology, there's the component of the psychological ways in which we deal with issues, and of course there's the social component.
Right.
And it appears like this particular coronavirus has wreaked havoc in pretty much all three aspects of our lives. So like you mentioned, the most obvious things, the most evident things to us are the problems which are social in nature. For example, the problem of insecurity. We've heard lots of people losing their jobs, being forced to stay at home.
Right.
And even the people who end up being at work at home. This work from home was initially considered a boon for some people.
Right.
But it's led to an extreme blurring of this work-life balance which was there. And now that is impeding an individual to kind of delineate aspects of what they are supposed to be doing at different times of the day. That's very clearly one of the major social implications. But as we talk about the social implication, one of the word that has been touted repeatedly is that of social distancing. In actuality, it should be physical distancing, because social distancing has led to people taking it pretty literally and isolating themselves. Even something as simple as calling their friends, family has become progressively less. So we've had data emerging over the course of many, many years that progressively people are experiencing loneliness. Mm-hmm. And loneliness is a major cause of a mental health burden on both young people as well as elderly individuals.
Right.
And that's one of the major psychological contributions of this particular illness and pandemic. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you mentioned, there is the helplessness, the sense of, I do not know when I am going to be affected, which leads to a general sense of stress. So broadly thinking, the psychological and social components of the mental health contribution we can understand.
Right.
But what's interesting is the novel coronavirus is a virus. Just like anything, it doesn't know where to go and affect it. And it has been affecting pretty much every single part of the body. The brain is no exception. And what we are noticing now is that people who are even recovering from COVID have been noted to have a significantly higher, prevalence of mental health problems. So anxiety and depression amongst the elderly, we are noticing problems such as an increase in confusion, a delirium-like picture.
Right.
So this particular illness has had major effects on all aspects of our mental health.
You also brought up a few conditions that one experiences once one has had COVID or has recovered from COVID. Brain fog is one phrase that even lay people like me have been exposed to. But it would be great if you could tell us about some of the key problems that people afflicted with COVID are experiencing in the area of mental health.
So it starts off pretty much with an emotional response to this. And the emotional response is varied. It's spread across a huge spectrum of either fear, anger, helplessness. And after a point of time, there is this emotional sense of numbness, which is very difficult for individuals, especially physicians who are treating, to even watch this. To see people who were hoping to get better are just passively accepting whatever is happening to them. And that is pretty distressing for both the treating physician and I'm sure for the individual who's suffering with that. Of course, as you mentioned that there is this brain fog, there are other physical symptoms. So just like any other viral infection, our bodily functions are affected. So there are changes in appetite. There is a significant loss of energy. It's almost like a crash after a sugar rush. So people talk about that intense sense of heaviness in their body.
Okay.
And it does tend to affect the way that they are able to even go about doing their basic things in life. So getting up and having a bath might be a chore.
Right.
Getting up, having their food might be a big chore.
Right.
And this definitely affects their sleep because while they are constantly tired, their body doesn't seem to want to sleep. So that it's almost preventing that. And this is the other major social problem that we are noticing is the way in which isolation has been happening.
Right.
Family members are unable to see or visit their loved ones when they are in the hospital. And that is leading to an intense sense of loneliness. And there's the despondency of seeing people falling sick all around you while being in a hospital or even in a quarantine center. The process and the duration of stay is pretty traumatic for people.
Right. Not to mention, I would imagine even things like bereavement at a time like this, right? It is a lot harder because all the things that we took for granted, the things that gave us closure in a certain way, the rituals that are associated with a death in the family, for example, all of those have been taken away from us. And that can make you feel quite bereft. Am I right about that, Dr. Shiva Prakash? Absolutely. And I agree with you. So the loss of life due to COVID is not only for the individual who has lost their life, but also, as you mentioned, the sense of closure for the people who are left behind. Right. And that's pretty painful to watch. You mentioned fatigue. You've mentioned people's inability to, even carry on with their day-to-day tasks. How much of this is actually, or is it like work from home where the lines are blurred between work and home? Is the line blurred between physical fatigue and mental fatigue?
Absolutely. And this is still an emerging field of research. We are getting more and more information from studies which are being done abroad. We are trying to establish and see what are the objective changes in the brain. And this is just a developing field, and I guess we'll have to keep our eyes and ears open to find out a little bit more about that. Right.
So here's where, I thought we must segue into perhaps how one is to arm oneself to be able to manage a challenging situation like this. If one has had COVID or has a member in the family who's COVID, what are some of the emotional skill sets that I must develop, or how does one cope?
The important thing to keep here in mind, Ms. Sheetal, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And this is not something which can be easily translated, but this is something which we can inculcate over a period of time. And one of the key things that we need to do is understand and keep ourselves informed about this illness. This is important. Now, there's a difference between getting information and being flooded with it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, at this point of time, it appears like we are being flooded with information rather than consuming it in an appropriate fashion.
Right.
A common thing would be for a person who's afflicted with COVID, it doesn't make sense trying to go and read the literature because, trust me, the medical literature right now has exploded. on the kind of treatments or the kind of experimental methods that might be utilized for managing COVID and so on.
Right.
But I think it would be more helpful to keep yourself informed about your current scenario, understand from your physician or the treating team about what are the things that we can do currently at this point of time, whether it might be doing slight physical activities, whether it might be changing the kind of diet to improve certain nutrients, or whichever way. So kind of refocusing on the here and now,
right,
rather than thinking about predicting the future. The other interesting skill would be that of learning acceptance, because all said and done, it is an illness. And whether we like it or not, we have to learn that if there is an illness, we have to try to find a solution and work towards that in the current time. Many a time, family members find it difficult to accept that their family member is not with them at this point of time, and they want it to be fixed, and they want them to get better and come back home immediately, which is completely understandable.
Right.
But rather than working towards something like that, agonizing over it could potentially be more detrimental to one's emotional health.
If I were to summarize what you've just told us, some of the coping strategies, although you've said it's not one size fits all, and we all need to really speak to the healthcare professionals involved in our treatment to understand what's going to work for us. But number one, learn to sift through the information and focus on that which is relevant to you in the current context. And of course, look for good sources. I'm adding that bit over here. Credible sources of information.
Absolutely.
Consuming everything that hits you left, right, center, which it does on WhatsApp, especially these days. Activity, focus on, physical activity and your diet, and consult with, again, professionals to tell you what will work for you. Focus on the here and now, you said, Dr. Shiva Prakash, because you can't really predict the future. And also learn how to accept that which you cannot change. Learn to accept. Am I summarizing it correctly, or am I reaching?
That is absolutely right. And that is very well put. Yeah.
Okay. Those are some skills, certainly, and I think our listeners will be happy to know that it is, I suppose, in one's control. Some aspect of this COVID is under one's control, and you've given us that which is in our control. But here's the other question about family and society, right? When someone is afflicted or has contracted COVID, is going through that, there's also the stigma associated with, my apartment dwellers don't want to really pass me by in the corridor. There is all of that to deal with as well. There's a sense of humiliation sometimes. In addition to that, and caring for a person and making them feel wanted and included back, what can family and society do to help someone with their current distress?
This is an important question because it brings up the idea of stigma. And previously, we used to deal with stigma about mental health issues.
Right.
But even a physical ailment such as caused by COVID-19, it's causing significant stigma.
Right.
This is something important. Family members, neighbors, friends, colleagues need to keep in mind that it's essential to maintain social contact. So social contact is one of the key things, as we discussed. It's one of the key modifiable things that we can do to ensure that somebody is being taken care of during the period of time that they themselves are lonely. And that social contact can be done by something as simple as making a phone call, making yourself available. And that would mean that sometimes people may want to experience, and we talked about the various kinds of emotional expressions that could be. Sometimes they just need a safe space to vent, and family members and friends are key to this particular part, wherein they might be very comfortable just venting.
Right.
And the family members, all they have to say is that they understand that this is a difficult period and they are here to hear them out. As people progressively get better, and after a period of quarantine, after a period of recovering from a bout of illness, after coming back home, people tend to walk around eggshells around the person who's been ill.
Right.
And that's even more traumatic because not only have they recovered, but now everybody treats them with gloved hands, so to say, right?
Right.
So I think it's important to start building up the routine of doing small things together.
Right.
Making them felt needed. Right. Making them engage in activity in a graduated fashion, which would basically help not only the self-esteem of the individual who's been ill and is recovering, but also would help build up their own physical strength in order to recover on the path of physical recovery. So
now here's the other thing. So much of talk, Dr. Shiva Prakash, on immunity and, that aspect. I have to ask you because you did tell us a little bit about COVID as a physical ailment and what it might do to your sense of mental well-being. But what about the other part of it? What is mental health? How does it affect your, COVID outlook, if I may put it that way? Is there some sort of a connection there? Does it reduce your immunity if you're unwell and then further diminish your ability to recover from COVID? Please help us understand this.
Right. And taking care of our mental health is one of the key things that we talk about all the time, because as the WHO says, there's no health without mental health.
Right.
And as we are spending more and more time looking at this particular illness, we are getting more and more evidence, right, which suggests that people who have had mental health issues, who have experienced depression, anxiety, other major mental health problems, not only are they more prone to develop an illness, but the severity of illness also seems to be affected. And this is just information that we are getting more and more as we see more and more individuals being treated.
Okay.
And so clearly we might think of COVID being a respiratory illness and mental illness as being a brain disorder. But it's very clear that even individuals who have had brain disorders, they seem to be especially predisposed to certain aspects of this illness, which makes it important for us to kind of pay attention to both aspects of this particular illness. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And I hope that is a takeaway for healthcare professionals who are tuned into this podcast as well. Focus on both areas. That is extremely important. Now, the final part of our conversation, this one would be incomplete if we did not arm people with some resources, perhaps, that they can seek if they want help to deal with their emotional distress. What can they do, Dr. Shiva Prakash?
Perfect. So it starts off with the family. It starts off with the friends. And clearly, the easiest and most easily available people are the individuals who are able to provide support in their own vicinity. Now, that is something at some point of time, individuals themselves are dealing with their own difficulties, their own anxieties, their own fears, and they may not have the emotional bandwidth to support individuals who are on their path to recovery.
Right.
And so at this point of time, clearly seeking out help from mental health professionals would be helpful.
Okay.
As we speak, there are a number of organizations, including the government, who are setting up helplines.
Okay.
There are a number of helplines wherein you can call up and just have a place to vent or talk about your fears. There is also the organization that I work with, SCARF, has had a 24-hour helpline wherein you're able to call up and speak with somebody, and it'll be a trained mental health professional who would be available for you. You are somebody who's already been in treatment.
Right.
I believe that all mental health professionals are sensitized to the fact that this is a time where their help is also needed. And so you can reach out to your own pre-existing mental health professionals.
Right.
I would say talk to somebody closer to you, because if there is a need for additional supports, reaching out to somebody within your own community or a mental health professional within your own community or within your own city would be really important. Now, I would really like to pitch this, especially to the healthcare professionals, because they have been working non-stop. And this means the nurses, this means people who work within the hospital, the janitorial staff, the ward boys, CT technicians, the lab assistants, the physicians, and the administrators.
Right.
This is a time where burnout is something that is very commonly something that we are seeing. And it's okay to ask for help, because in the end, we are working towards helping the person who's lying down on the bed or in front of us. So we need to be able to take care of ourselves before we are able to take care of anybody else.
Absolutely. And interestingly, the literal thing in the airline, what they say, right, wear your oxygen mask before, you help somebody else. And metaphorically speaking, healthcare professionals would be required to do that for themselves. And thank you so much, Dr. Shiva Prakash, for pointing it out that their own well-being is also important if we are to tide through this very challenging period. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Shiva Prakash, and helping us understand the connection between COVID and mental health and helping us spread awareness on this very important subject.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For more discussions and resources, visit gccmc.in.